Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's MHTV. Really pleased to have you with us. We've got a great episode tonight with Dr. Marion Lynch. But before we get started, let's go over to Vanessa to say how you can join in and participate. We'd love to hear from you. Vanessa?
Thank you, Nicky, everyone, and welcome tonight. So for those of you who join in on a regular basis, then you'll know that you need to head over to Facebook and like the Unite MHNA page. And the feed should then pop up on your screen, and you can follow the comments, ask us questions, join the conversation. We do like to keep it sociable, so do ask us some questions as we're going along, and I'll be keeping an eye on that feed. If you're more of a Twitter person, then go onto Twitter and look up the hashtag MHTV. And again, that should filter out the conversation, and you can ask us questions there and comment on the conversation as we go along. And I'll be feeding that into the conversation tonight as much as I can. So that's it for me for now. And I'll hand you back over to Nicky.
Hello. So fantastic. So before we come to Marion, and then we're going to talk about your I'm Fine Art project, but can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and about your career? Because you've had a really interesting kind of road to the place that you're at today.
I have. Thank you. And hello, everybody. So my name's Marion, and I'm a general nurse, and I'm a mental health nurse and a public health specialist. Just run up the stairs. So
all good.
I started back in the 80s. In the UK, and realised when I was an adult general nurse that there was more to it, more to people's health, particularly as I was looking after young people who had leukemia at the time. So I became a mental health nurse, and then I realised there was more to it than that, so I became a public health specialist and kind of went around the world doing all of these different jobs. I ended up in running health systems, really, and being an associate dean for 20 years, where I had a child and then said, I know, I'll do a PhD on the side. Ridiculous idea. 8 years later, still only one child, thank goodness. And my PhD examined how poetry and prose were used to teach medicine. And it kind of got me into that idea of how we use the humanities. I think deep down, I always wanted to be an artist, but I was made to be a nurse because it was. But I've always kept that artistic way because it's what we as nurses connect with other things that are going on all the time. It's, it is scientific, but it's also humanistic. So my PhD helped me start to look at how we designed education that used the arts, that actually mattered not only to patients, but to curriculum designers, etc. And I'm still doing that with programs across Africa now. So fast forward years to COVID, and I'd run away to New Zealand, and I was in the middle of a country park in New Zealand when the pandemic and shutdown was announced there, and I quickly had to get somewhere and start to design educational programs for someone voluntarily who wanted to address the mental health of nurses and healthcare workers across the world. Came back to the UK, was flown back. Thankfully, I was using an Irish passport, and the German government said they would fly me back if I was the medic on the plane. And worked at the Nightingale in London as one of the education team. And there I kept hearing people say, oh, I'm fine, and started to realise that the approach to psychological PPE, just as this approach to sort of personal PPE, was being promoted time and time again. But people were still just going, oh, I'm fine. Swish on a bit more. And I did some research across Europe with nurses, asking for one picture and 150 words of their story of COVID, really. And from that, started to realise that what was portrayed in the media about images of nurses bore no resemblance at all to the pictures that I was being sent from across Europe. And many of the nurses from across Europe were continuing in essential services. Not everybody was draped in PPE, looking exhausted, leaning up against a wall, white female, ponytail. These images I was being shown were quite different. And that made me then think, what on earth are these images in the media doing to us? Our I'm fine kind of feeling, but also to our profession, our identity. And how could we shift the dial a bit by actually looking at images that aren't necessarily on the front of the Guardian or nursing magazines, and use them to help us think about our roles and our responsibilities. And fortunately, I'm also a trustee with a charity called Paintings in Hospitals. And there we work with patient groups and artists and all kinds of hospitals. Many of you might have seen your PIH displays in the hospitals. And they were interested in taking this a bit forward. So none of this was paid work. None of this was, a job description. This is just my passion about what nurses do and how people see nurses and the influence nurses can have. So we started about a year and a bit ago with Paintings in Hospital, and this is what leads into the I'm Fine. Google Arts and Culture did a series called Healthcare Heroes, and they took paintings that had been volunteered and done by artists who hadn't been able to do their work and created them into a program called Healthcare Heroes, and had a bit of an issue with the hero label. And I wanted to sort of unpack that a bit because it has all kinds of connotations. Your heroes don't get paid, heroes don't die, heroes look a certain way, and nurses need to be paid, and nurses were dying, and nurses look many ways. So I wanted to explore that heroes element. None of the European nurses I'd worked with described themselves as heroes at all. So this was a media view of heroes. And this is how we got to the I'm Fine project, which is funded by a small grant from the Burdett Trust. And I shall tell you all about what it is in a moment, unless you've got any questions about that.
I'd quite like to go back to sort of like the start of what you were saying, because you said so many things that are really interesting. I'm sure Vanessa will have questions as well. But it's this, first of all, so the first thing that really jumped out at you is because I think art and representation have been so important to us during COVID, particularly as a nation. Everything from kind of, Grace and Perry's art project, people starting to draw again, people having more time on their hands, the way that nursing has been represented, and there's so many different ways that it's been represented throughout the whole of this kind of pandemic, and still now, because the political situation being as it is, you can't help but have accompanying pictures to go with the stories. And as you rightly say, those pictures are often very white, very female dominated, and bearing in mind the people who took the brunt of that death toll don't look like that at all. And that was really interesting. And the other thing is as well, it reminded me a bit of the head clutcher meme, when on Twitter and service users and people who use mental health services are constantly saying mental health and experiencing mental distress doesn't just look like this, the proper head clutcher. And for the first time, I really saw kind of staff being given the head clutcher meme. Everyone was like staggering around, leaning up against walls, sitting on the floor. I mean, I can't think of a single nurse who voluntarily sits on the floor of a hospital ever.
We know what's there like.
Really. All the places you would sit, even if you were slumping, you'd be like, oh, I need to be back up again. But so there was the whole representation of that was really interesting. I wonder if we could just have a moment just to think about that before we go on to looking at the kind of representations that nurses were putting forward of themselves. So do you have anything else you'd like to say about what's going on when people show photos or images of nursing in that kind of heroic, battered, bruised stance? What's going on there?
Well, we've got a sort of a historical view of nurses and imagery, and it's they're either in the war or in the ward. Community nurses don't exist, and they're either next to a bed or in a bed, and sexualized or passive. And in paintings, nurses, if they're not in the war doing something heroic, they're to the background of someone else's. So the doctor, the Luke 5 sort of portrays the nurse will be in the back, which is all very well if the focus is on a sort of a patient or a community. But if it's on another profession, that kind of makes me wonder where they sit in society. So historically, we've had that sort of uniformed and uniform issue. And as in the media, people did want to have a kind of something to clap at, as opposed to something to, was it maybe not your neighbour, not too close. And what we know is the huge diaspora communities in nursing don't appear in the image banks of anything, be it our academic books, which are often male and othering female or non-white. And so I think there's a pattern in our media portrayals that we've been socialized to see nurses in a certain way. And when nurses aren't in that way, for instance, in the I'm Fine book, we've got nurses being politically active, striking for more PPE. It does, it's a bit uncomfortable for people because we've got that vocation or that religious element where nurses come from in-house, used to be in domestic service or in religious service, and are seen as a cost to a hospital rather than an asset. We can't have any more nurses, they cost too much. You wouldn't ever say that about doctors. So there's something about the imagery and then the political ideology that goes with that. So I wanted to just turn the dial a little bit and get people to think about when we're using art. Art is there. The great thing is it helps other people see things. It's not what you see, it's what you enable others to see through this art. And that's what Degas said that. And so that's what I wanted to start doing.
When nurses were sending their pictures of you, what were they sending pictures of?
Very, very rarely of a mask and face marks. There's kind of there was a kind of in the media and some social media, there was some pride in that, war scars. And I said to nurses that no pictures of patients because of confidentiality. So they were sending pictures of their environment or pictures of their team or pictures of them doing normal nurse stuff. There were no glory pictures, there were no beauty pageant pictures, and there were no war zone pictures. It was nurses getting on with doing nursing stuff. And then the story that came with it could have been about the emotional trauma that went with that, the guilt that they were still having to do normal services when their colleagues were in places where they could get injured, or they were not able to visit their own family anymore because people are ostracizing them, or stories of people crossing the road to avoid them. Those were the kind of things, because nurses weren't popular because they were seen as a vector of infection. So you went from hero to pathogen in some countries very quickly. So nurses don't portray themselves in the same way as the media does. And also nurses rarely put themselves to the fore of the picture.
I wonder if that's one of the reasons that kind of the images of nurses are always being done to rather than doing themselves a little bit. Because I've been nursing years and years and years too, and I don't know many nurses who are like straight to the front, think that they're amazing. Most of the nurses I know are actually really self-deprecating, very funny.
Yeah.
And are very keen to make sure that everybody is recognized, not just one person. I think that doesn't make for a good selfie, does it? that kind of, and if you're looking for kind of like dynamic, powerful images, the kind of work, the kind of things that nurses tend to value and tend to honor, maybe don't photograph as well.
Yeah. And so the I'm Fine project was to try and make those invisible aspects visible, and not to turn away from the we as a collective nurse to the me as some kind of hero, but instead shine a light on the range of things that nurses do, and use those where the nurse or the activity was front and center, to then enable other nurses to go, actually, this is also me, this represents me, I see me in this. Or the corollary, as with art, I don't see me in this at all. And then be able to reflect on their experiences with COVID, review what happened for themselves, maybe using the picture of another as a way of being able to talk about it, because some people can't or don't want to talk about themselves. And because all of our photographs are about amazing things that nurses do, and rejoice in the career and the profession and the work that we do. There isn't one scarred, sad face. We've got enough of those.
Yeah, and that's not to denigrate that experience, but it's just to say there's tons of experiences as well. So if anyone's sort of curious about what we're talking about, if you go to MHTV on the hashtag on Twitter, there's links to the Google Arts page, and all that work is there for you to see. And there's some extraordinary pictures there, aren't there, of every different kind. Can I quote you back to you, Marion, before I go to Vanessa? So, we are humans. We need connection with other people. Art acts as an anchor to our humanity. So is that what the aim of this is then, to remind people of the kind of human side of it rather than the hero side of it, or are they both the same thing? What's going on there?
I think it's whatever people will want this to be. People say I don't know what good art is, but I know when I see it. Well, that'll be the same with your experience with art. And this is 8 images or photographs of an activity, 2 blogs, your blog and Joan's blog, and it's more than the images. It's a bit of a toolkit, an educational toolkit. So the I'm Fine comes from, like I said, people always saying to you, I'm fine. And as a mental health nurse, we're always encouraged to say, ask twice. So this is the I'm fine, and then the second chance to ask again, and a tool to enable people to say, oh yes, I'm fine, and I could be finer. So the content of the resource gives a story of where we've got to so far in terms of nursing. For those nerds like me, we've got a map of the 21st century nurse issues at the moment, and so to get the statistics together, I've kind of put a chapter together of, sit rep, we call it, where are we now? And then it builds on ways that we can supervise, participatory supervision, ways that we can actually use education to support thinking. So it's a bit of a toolbox with the photographs in it, and it's international as well, and it's representative of the communities we serve and the colleagues we work with. So I was very keen to undo the me look that become a trope in many of the areas. So I have found pictures that have won awards. My absolute favourite, because I have worked with people in care homes, is a picture of a nurse from Brazil, and she's in a care home, and she's got the kind of shower curtain, cape, backwards cape thing on, and giving a hug, and the joy of the human connection and the representative of this larger than life nurse from Brazil working in a care home. Everything that's not seen in the media speaks volumes to me, because I know that so many people in my own family included either wanted to do that to residents, or were residents and wanted that to happen. So this is the kind of conversation you can have when you see a picture like that. It can help you recognize the value of what we do. Others are from Africa, out in communities doing vaccinations. When we think, gosh, you think, Toaster Rugby Club's cold. You should imagine some other places where we can't even keep the vaccines cold because they're too hot. And then there are pictures from nurses' experiences in the UK that may resonate with people. So
brilliant. Vanessa, is there anything you wanted to come in with?
I mean, it's fascinating discussion. I was just reflecting on, I don't know if you remember, but during the lockdown, somebody started a movement where nurses who died during the pandemic, their pictures were shared and a bit of sort of information on, people's lives to kind of celebrate and acknowledge that, the lives of people who, died during the pandemic. And I felt that was really important. And I know one of my friends who's an artist took part in the Healthcare Heroes project and had the same issues as us, not a clinician. And one of the things she was wanting to capture, but didn't, because I think it was a little bit too raw at the time, was a nurse who, died during the pandemic. So as you were talking, I was thinking about that as well, that we kind of talked about nurses and, how heroic they were, but there wasn't as much talk about kind of nurses who were losing their lives. And then the other thing for me is about mental health nurses, because obviously, our trade is in communication, isn't it? And very difficult to communicate with somebody, in PPE. So for me, what doesn't make a great picture is a nurse doing a digital consultation with a nurse. So, for example, in prisons where prisons were on lockdown and people weren't allowed out of their cells, nurses innovating and actually still being able to see somebody online, that doesn't make a great picture. But actually, that's kind of where mental health nurses were kind of using their skills in a life-saving way. But because it was mental health life-saving, it isn't captured in the same way as, showing an intensive care unit, which, of course, it is, highly sensitive. But at the same time, nurses in mental health were also saving people's lives and still are, in the aftermath of the pandemic. So it's kind of what I'm reflecting on, and interested to know, what kind of themes that you might have captured around mental health nurses specifically so far, if you're able to say that at this stage.
I can't, because I didn't differentiate. I don't actually know what the nurses are in the photographs, because in the I'm Fine project, I don't know them. There's one that's a collage of all, because it is an image that can then be interpreted in whatever way. I don't know. And for my European work, no mental health nurses came forward. As you say, it's difficult to capture the nuances of care.
Yeah, maybe says something about the invisibility of what we do as well, which is quite hard to capture in a concrete way in a picture, because it is so difficult. I mean, I did a lot of work with schools during the pandemic, and obviously, again, nurses innovating through using technology again to kind of maintain contact with, children and young people or over a screen. And as we know, mental health issues amongst young people were a kind of huge issue and continue to be as a result of the pandemic, and quite difficult to capture what nurses were contributing there. But again, life-saving in many situations. So,
I think this is why the image issue is so important, because when looking at the images, for instance, in the I'm Fine project, you also see what's not there. And most people aren't in ITU. And most people aren't in a hospital. So that pyramid of care is something we need to acknowledge, only by saying, actually, who's not here, who's not in the picture, whose voice have we got? Can we maybe discuss it in more detail?
It is interesting because it pulls on so many different things all at once. It's hard to almost know where to start unpacking it, because you've got mental health nurses being invisible. I didn't see much from LD nurses, despite the fact that the population they worked with was also under horrendous pressure. But when you do see people working in older adults, they always have that kind face on.
Yeah, totally.
Like my experience of working with older adults was riotous. It was funny, it was sad, it was all lots of different sorts of things, but it wasn't necessarily cutesy,
patronizing,
because it's a challenging place to work, isn't it? And you're often and what the nursing homes were going through was so horrendous. I think it doesn't, it almost feels like there was all these pictures and none of them really told the truth of it.
And also those pictures are really patronizing. It's like a nurse talking down to an older person. And the reality is, what was so tough for nurses working in care homes is that the people who are dying in care homes are people that nurses have had relationships with, professionally for maybe years and years. And, those relationships weren't patronizing relationships. Those relationships were built on, humanity and connection, weren't they? Which isn't really captured through a kind of patronizing, look at an older person who might have led, a really interesting, exciting life, and often, has as well. And, we only see the sort of physical frailty, don't we, in those pictures? We don't see the person's life story behind that. Yeah.
It is a really strange thing. It really is. And then thinking again as well about kind of media representation of nurses, you did point out, you have those kind of tropes, and they're actually quite sexist tropes. Helper, sexy, battle axe, and it's almost like the functions, isn't it? It's sort of like the ages of woman in a strange way, which is so unfair for our male colleagues as well. Not least because it's totally unfair to women. But you never see pictures of dynamic leadership that's female. And there are things that would be really interesting and really inspiring to see. Maybe we do need to do more about actually continuing this project to grow and actually make the kind of images that make people want to be nurses. Because seeing someone slumped on a grubby floor with like mask marks, that isn't going to inspire anybody. No, it won't inspire anything other than a vague sense of horror.
And you may think people said, I might like to train to do that. Then let me see. No one's going to stay if a world's like that. And the world of nursing isn't like that. That's not our world, and that's not a world I ever want people to have to feel they have to stay in. That has been a lot in the past 2 years for a lot of people, and now we need to say. There is a reason why so many of us died, and there's a reason why so many of us of a certain age and a certain career and a certain ethnic group died, and that's around power, and that's around our position as nurses. So my aim with the I'm Fine project is to start the conversations and then construct a way that we can form a different type of identity. And not lose our compassion and our humanity, because those are key to any nursing. But where's the recognition for the safety critical work, the STEM, the technology? Oh my goodness, those. Let's go back to those ITU images. Nobody but a nurse could manage all of those tubes and fluids and stuff. But we didn't see that. We saw damaged faces rather than there's 28 different infusions going on. That's not the only part of nursing, but there is something about us recognizing that complexity. For my role, it's how we work with the genome now, how we enable people to understand their own DNA and their genetics so that they can make choices in life, and how we can support nurses to take that on as part of their role. So that's my next element. We go from the uniqueness of individuals and patients portrayed through our conversations and our connection with them to the uniqueness of our DNA, and the nurse is the glue in between those. We're the translator, the sense maker, and the safe.
In so many ways as well. Yeah. And on the other hand, we have finite resources. We need to target those resources, and that's going to be the future. And I think it will be something that nurses will be relied on to do and to understand, to get involved in.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think what I really like about kind of the I'm Fine project that I found a little bit disturbing with the clapping, although, thank you to people who clap, thank you to people who recognize what nurses were doing. But it was like a wave that seemed really massive and then just ebbed away without any real change. And I think the idea that you would look at what's positive and what's been a struggle in the last couple of years and then seek to think, what do we do to move forward? That to me feels very nursey. I like that. It feels positive. It's like turning those ideas and thoughts into some action. So what are the next stages with that as part of this project?
So we've got a webinar that launches it on the 19th of January. We'll put it all on social Twitter. Please do join. Many, many spaces to come. And on that webinar, hear from experts, including Nicky, on how art is used, the need, the issues for nursing, the supervision models, etc.
Yeah.
The resource will then be online for free on the Paintings in Hospital website, and you'll be able to tap into it to say, maybe as a lesson plan or a teaching tool or something to use as a trigger in supervision, or that magic revalidation moment when you sit there on an evening and go, I really can't believe I have to do this, and yet value it and go, this is a moment for my reflection. Take a piece of art, take one of these photographs and say, what does this say to me? What does this say about me? What does this say about my profession and my future? And by creating that new kind of thought and intelligence in nursing, looking at the positives and focusing on the future rather than the negatives and focusing on the past, I think we can create new knowledge about us, a new energy. 500,000 nurses doing this. If 500,000 nurses did something about images in their revalidation, imagine the change in conversations that could happen. Yeah.
But thinking more broadly about art, how did you come to get involved in paintings in hospitals?
So my PhD made me a bit obsessed, and then I was invited to be professor. My clinical area is dementia, so I was invited to be professor with the University of West London, and teaching on their master's programs. And much of the work I'd done previously had been on patient representation through art and images. So I was teaching, and they Paintings in Hospitals contacted me and said, would you like to apply to be a trustee? And I thought, oh my goodness, that'd be ridiculous. I'm, if you know how many jobs I've got, and I'm exhausted, and I already run, I've got my own charity because of work I've done before. So I said, yes, of course. And I've been on their board about 4 years now. And it's, I would say to any nurse, get involved in charity and become a trustee or shadow a trustee, because you get insights into the rest of the world. And, nurses can start to look a bit insular sometimes, and, health is everything, but actually health is important, but it's not everybody cares as much as we do. Paintings in Hospital obviously do, but their focus is on the art. And I've loved every moment of it and learnt how to do things. And one of the key elements there is we've started to look at equality and diversity and inclusion. What's within the collections that we've got? What communities do we work with? What is it we're trying to do in terms of outreach to people who are experiencing homelessness or loneliness or in care homes? It's absolutely not paintings on the walls. It's so much more than that. Yes, so do seek out shadow trustees, get involved with the charity, see what's going on, because there's nothing like stepping out of your own comfort zone to realise some changes you can do for yourself as well.
Absolutely. And I think nurses constantly underestimate their skills. You know, if you're a nurse, you are trustworthy, you are organized, you can communicate with lots of different people, you can convey ideas, you know, the things that you have to offer, I think you can really overlook the gifts that you have, and to share them around, be it school governorship, being a trustee, that stuff's so important. And if you can do something sort of almost adjacent in the same way that you have, you can even then bring in your kind of like sort of nursing and medical experience as well, which is really useful.
Yeah,
really useful.
And this is how we shift the dial then, the identity of nurse, because nurses are our chief execs of hospitals, are our entrepreneurs in business, are our leaders in systems. Nurses aren't just nurses in wards. And so a nurse on the board of a charity, go, oh, you've got a nurse. Oh, lovely. Oh, my goodness, you must have a real sense of whatever it is you bring, you know.
Absolutely.
Let's step into our lives of nurses. Lean in, not lean out.
So we'll definitely be, if you go on the MHTV tagline, we'll be putting the I'm Fine Project webinar up, which is a free access. Is there anything, Vanessa, that you wanted to talk about? Because I know you're very passionate about, you know, art and health being used together.
Yeah, we've talked about the visual arts. It'd be quite good to kind of talk about some of the other arts as well. So, for example, poetry, I think is a great way of nurses being able to express themselves, and also a great way for nurses to work with people in telling their stories as well. I think there's this sense with poetry and maybe art to an extent that it's something exclusive and something that you've got to be really good at to give it a go. But actually, it's not about being good at it. It's about just expressing yourself, isn't it? So yeah, poetry is the medium that interests me. I would say poetry and words generally, really.
Well, that's lovely to hear, because that was my PhD.
Yeah, I thought you said that. Yeah, so I'm interested in
much of the teaching that I used to do and still do. We'll use a poem, and one of the ones that I've had a lot of feedback on from nurses is Thomas Hardy's The Whitewashed Wall. And it's a poem that enables you to understand grief and sadness or change. And even when I say the title, I get that emotional response, but also that recognition that it links to much of my clinical work about supporting people in loss and moving on. So the poetry element opens up doors that people didn't realize were open to them, not just in terms of what they understand, but then what they can write down in words as well. And poems don't have to be an A-level English. Poems can be a bunch of words that someone else says that made me know what you mean.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so great about poetry now, that there's sort of a sort of academic snobbery about kind of poetry having to stick to a particular form in order for it to be a poem. But so many poets on social media now have just totally disrupted that form and are telling their stories through poetry, and are getting poetry book deals as a result of their poetry. And I know there's lots of kind of discussion both ways about whether their work's poetry, but to me, somebody like Rupi Kaur, who's got millions of followers and has written millions of books and is communicating to people through a poetry, if that kind of connects with people, then to me that's poetry, regardless of what form it is. And I think that opens the door maybe for other people to write poetry and not worry about whether it's following rules and whether they understand what a stanza is or whatever.
It's rap. Rap is poetry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
TikTok moments of poetry.
Yeah, but what's really interesting about that is it's people not waiting to be given a platform, people taking a platform and making it happen for themselves. If you control the narrative, if you value your voice, whether that's through images, through written word, and actually just get it out there, you start to find that a lot of people feel the same way as you do. Yeah, I think waiting for permission to speak or permission to say who it is, who you are, what your values are, you're waiting a long time. Yeah, nobody's going to give you that space, I don't think. Very easily.
what are you waiting for? Yeah, that's my request to people who are on here. And what's the worst that could happen? Nothing bad will happen.
Definitely. And I'm seeing really time has got away from us again tonight. We haven't had time for questions or anything yet. So we're going to have to finish up. But can we come to both of you for any kind of like last thoughts on anything from art, creativity and health? So Marion, come to you first. Anything you'd like to leave the audience with, or
I am a nerd as well, so I can get all jargony, but we're in the 5th wave of public health now, which means that we have to start to look at the aesthetics, what things look like, feel like. There's no point telling people to stop doing this and start doing that anymore. It doesn't work. We need to value our cultures. We did that 2,000 years ago before we separated out medicine and from the meaning of life. So this has theory and practice behind it, and puts the fun back into functional nursing as well.
Absolutely. So please do. We'll put the links up on the Facebook afterwards, but also on MHTV. They're already there if you're looking on Twitter. So please do investigate and explore that. Vanessa, is there anything you'd like to leave us with tonight?
I think for me, just, continuing this conversation, like Nicky knows that, I'm quite passionate myself about arts and mental health and, any opportunities that we've got, because I think it's important both for kind of representing nursing, but also it's important for helping, particularly in mental health, for people to tell their stories, isn't it? And to capture those stories for people. So I think for me, kind of following your work and seeing how that evolves, and any opportunity that we've got to kind of promote that as well, so that people online get the opportunity to get involved in some of those conversations is a great thing. I think that, having this platform, really, you've been able to use social media now, whilst as you say, that the media is kind of promoting a particular image of nursing, a social movement can actually be much more influential than anything a newspaper puts out nowadays. I mean, most newspapers are obsolete now, aren't they? So I think that, the power of the people is kind of this generation, and I think we need to capitalise on that. So they're my final thoughts. But it's been fascinating. I just wish we had longer to talk to you, really.
Absolutely.
It's flown as I knew it would. Yeah, it really has.
And
so thank you.
And for anybody who has sort of been thinking about the difficulties that we've been through over the last couple of years, please do, if you're struggling or you're worried, reach out. You've got Nurse Lifeline, you've got friends, colleagues, people who value and care about you. So please do reach out, because we see you and we value you, and we're tremendously glad to be one big family. And so please do seek support if you need it, and take some time to celebrate by looking at these images, because they are really beautiful. So thank you very much, and good night, everybody. We've really enjoyed having you speak to us tonight. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.